The Witch Ball, written by E.F. Benson, told to you by Edward E. French. It was quite impossible to determine which of us had seen it first, where it gleamed, blue and resplendent, in spite of the grime which covered it, behind the dingy panes of that obscure little shop. It reposed on a rusty steel fender, in the middle of frayed rugs, Britannia metal teapots, wine glasses, cracked plates, billiard balls, stamp albums, glass beads, pewter mugs, odd volumes of obsolete fiction and history primers at tuppence each, false teeth with coral-colored gums, all the depressing miscellany of an unprosperous curiosity shop. Simultaneously and without a word, we stepped off the pavement and hurried across the street. "But is it to be yours or mine?" I said to Marjorie. "Who saw it first?" Marjorie's good sense is always admirable. "Oh, what does that matter at present?" she said. "The only important thing just now is that it should be ours. We'll settle the other point when we've got it." She opened the door of the shop, setting a bell jangling, and after an anxious pause, made hideous to us both by the frightful thought that before we had secured it, somebody else might come in on the same quest, a slow step creaked down the stairs within, and the proprietor, eyeing us suspiciously, entered. "I should like to look at that glass ball in your window," said Marjorie quite calmly. "How much is it?" 10 shillings were all that he asked for it, and though Marjorie dearly loves a little genteel chaffering, she made no attempt to get it cheapened or to examine it closely for cracks, for it must be securely ours without delay. So a minute later we emerged again with the witch ball wrapped up in a greasy leaf of antique newspaper. Though our intention had been to go for a stroll through the streets of Tillingham till lunchtime on this hot May morning, there was no thought of that now, and we went straight back to my house a few hundred yards distant with our treasure. "I shall go and wash it at once," she said, "and then we'll settle whose it is." She hurried upstairs while I went on into the book-room where, a few minutes before, we had left her husband, Hugh Kingswood. "Back again?" he asked. "I expected you would be. Far too hot to walk on such a morning." "Oh, that's not why we're back," said I. We found something in a shop which we had to buy and bring straight home. A witch ball, the most wonderful ever seen. Marjorie's washing it. And then we've got to settle whose it is, for we saw it absolutely at the same moment. Presently she came downstairs with it. Even when it had been covered with dust and dirt, it had gleamed like blue fire veiled beneath a scum of ashes. But now that she had washed it, it burned with a far intenser splendor. It was of uncommon size, more than a foot in diameter, and of soft sapphire blue, and it reflected, gorgeously steeped in its own color, the rounded image of the room. Fireplace and bookcases, ceiling and floor, sofa and piano, all appeared there with that magical distortion which convex reflection gives. And all was dyed deep in that superb hue. And the window was there with curved sashes, and there at the top of it was a blink of sky that was of some luminous turquoise tint such as shines in dreams or in fairyland. And yet, though these pictures were only a matter of a reflecting surface, it was like looking into fathomless depths of blue. The vision seemed to sink into that shining globe and dive further and further into gulfs of azure. Witch balls have always had for me some mysterious charm, born perhaps of the memories of twinkling Christmas trees in childhood. But here there was something more, something of intrinsic lure. There arose the agonizing question of ownership. Marjorie, as a matter of fact, had actually paid for it, but being one of the few women I know who is a thorough gentleman, she spumed so feminine an argument, merely calling attention to her nobility. "I can't think what's to be done," she said. "I shall go into decline unless I have it. But then, no doubt, you will too. And as far as I can judge, we saw it on the same tick of time. Hughie, what's the fair thing?" Hugh did not answer, and I saw he was looking steadfastly into the witch ball with some sort of rapt detachment. Then, as if with an effort, he shook himself free of it. "What a marvelous piece," he said. "But I don't like it, Marjorie. There's something uncanny about it." Let Dick have it." "If that's all you've got to suggest," she remarked severely, "you might as well not have said anything." She turned from him with scorn. "I can only see one way of settling it," she said to me, "and that's by the foolish device of tossing up. If I believed that you saw it a fraction of a second before me, I promise you that I should let you have it. But by chance we saw it absolutely together. So let's go to chance again." I could think of nothing better, so I spun a shilling, and Marjorie called heads. I opened my hand, and the witch ball was hers. "Rapture," she said. "Oh, Dick, how I sympathize with you." "I don't," said you. "I congratulate you. There's something queer about it. The two of them, Marjorie, a first cousin of mine, and you, one of my oldest friends, were staying with me in this small Sussex town for a week or 10 days. There was a spell of blazing weather, and though golf had been an intended diversion, it was really impossible to play in this smiting and windless heat. The sky was as brass above and the ground as brass beneath, and instead we often motored down to the shore for a bathe in the afternoon, with some subsequent expedition vaguely in view, such as to a visit to Bodiam or Dungeness, or merely drove about the lanes and byways of the Romney Marsh and the wooded inland. We did not much care whether we got anywhere in particular, for the hedgerows were brimming with pink rose blossom and the woods still milky green with the foliage of the spring. We lighted on adorable little villages nestling in the folds of the downs, on hammer ponds fringed with cotton rush from the edge of which mallards got up with a clangor of wings, or on the wide levels of the marsh we came to antique and solitary farmhouses of timber and rough cast with glowing gardens set in red brick walls, and Marjorie would declare that life was but a tinkling cymbal when lived in such a place within sound of the sea and within sight of Rye. It was the pearl of them all that we passed that afternoon on our ramble. A plot of garden rather wild and overgrown fronted the road, and on the tall iron gate in the wall was affixed a board to announce that it was to be sold or let unfurnished. Marjorie, of course, insisted on our stopping. The gate ground on rusty hinges, and we went up the paved garden wall to the house. But the door was locked, and no knockings or ringings produced any response, and we had to get an idea of the interior by peering through the unblinded windows. The rooms were absolutely empty, but the paint and papering looked fairly fresh, and it was clear that the house had not been untenanted for long. The flower garden through which we had passed and the kitchen garden at the back afforded similar evidence, for neither had been neglected for long. Vegetables, for instance, peas and beans, had been sown in the spring, though not staked. The kitchen garden was unwalled, and had only a wooden paling between it and the marsh meadows, and alongside of it ran one of the drainage dikes that intersect the marsh. Along the raised edge of it had been planted, evidently not more than a year or two ago, a row of young willows. These had prospered, and now formed a screen for the garden against the prevailing southwesterly winds. At one end of them was a tool shed, the roof of which was beginning to sag, at the other a couple of derelict beehives. It was certainly an entrancing retreat for any who cared to live the solitary life, but it was sad to see a house and garden full of such charm and tranquillity beginning to suffer from want of care. "Oh, how I long for it," said Marjorie. "Hughie, how happy we should be here. You would start very early every morning to go up to town, driving into Rye, not more than 4 miles, I should think, and then a mere 2 hours and a half in the train. What's 5 hours every day in the train, with such a nice drive at the end?" "Delicious," said you, "especially on a winter evening with a southwesterly gale blowing. And I don't like the feel of the place. There's something sinister." "Darling, you're rather hard to please," said Marjorie. "You didn't like my witch ball, and now you don't like my adorable house. How blissful I should be living here with my witch ball." He shook his head. "No, you wouldn't," he said. "There's something here. You would feel it before long." "Don't be spooky," said Marjorie. She could not tear herself away without another look through the ground-floor windows of the house, And meantime you and I strolled down to the gate where we had left the motor. In spite of his almost savagely practical mind in matters of business, he had always had some queer, clairvoyant power of perception, which every now and then pushes its way to the surface of his mind. He sees odd scenes which prove to be actual if he looks in a crystal, whenever he will consent to try the experiment. But his conscious mind fights shy of this gift, and he will not often attempt to exercise it. Another queer thing is that if I look into the crystal at which he is gazing, I see there what he sees, though I might crystal gaze day and night by myself without seeing any tremor or shadow appear there. But we have tested this odd joint phenomenon many times, and always successfully, so that it seems proved that he can establish some telepathic communication with me, though I have no independent power myself, and that this conjunction of my mind with his helps his own power. It occurred to me now when he said there was something here, that some blink of this psychic perception had come to him. I asked him whether it was so. Yes, there is something here, he said, which I don't like a bit. In the kitchen garden, particularly. It's steeped in horror of some sort. And the queer thing is that Marjorie's witch ball gives me the same feeling. No, I don't mean a similar feeling, but the same. I think you and I will have to gaze and see if we can get at anything. It so happened that Marjorie went to bed early that night, and as soon as she had gone, Hugh and I moved in from the garden where we had been sitting after dinner for the sake of coolness into the book room, where stood the witch ball. His notion was to make it his crystal, and see if by gazing into it any manifestation appeared. We turned out all the lights but one, so that the reflection should not be distracting, and now, in the dimmer illumination, the witch ball lost its sapphire hue, precisely as the stone itself does by artificial light, and seemed black. Just one point of radiance gleamed in the middle of this pool of clear, deep darkness. We must have sat there long before anything came through to Hugh's vision, for the house had grown quiet, and the church clock had twice chimed a quarter hour before he spoke. Look, something is coming, he said in that dreamy, monotonous voice which always betokens that he is in that state of half-trance which precedes vision. Tell me what you see. There was something seething far down in the dark pool of the ball. It was as if clear black water was beginning to boil from below and break into bubbles. These bubbles bursting on the surface were slightly luminous, and as they multiplied, the darkness cleared, as if with the approach of dawn or night. It grew rapidly brighter. There's a line of rooftops against the sky, I said, and in front of the house there's a garden. There's a row of trees on the left, young trees, and they're blowing about in a wind. And there's the figure of a woman. I can't make it out. She seems to be lying under the trees, among their roots. I mean, not on the ground beside them. And there's a tool shed close by. Suddenly, with a gasp of my breath, I recognized the scene. It was the kitchen garden of the house in the marsh which we had visited that afternoon. In the shock which came with this recognition, my attention was jerked away from its quiet scrutiny, and in the instant the vision had vanished. I was staring into a black witch ball with one point of light in it. Hugh was still gazing into it with wide eyes. Yes, he said, I see all that. But she's moving now. She's standing upright, and now she's gone. The whole thing has vanished. Yes, of course it was the place we saw. But who was the woman? We didn't see her this afternoon. And where has she gone? He raised his head and peered out, as if trying to focus something through the open door into the garden. And though following his eyes I saw nothing but the deep dusk there, I knew that there was some presence which had come out of the witch ball and was hovering there, watching us. You, what are you looking at? I said sharply. It was with an evident effort that he detached his gaze and turned it back into the room. I don't know, he said, but there was someone there, though I saw nothing. We won't try it again tonight because I've got the jumps, but tomorrow we must sit again. Don't tell Marjorie anything about it. I came down next morning after an uneasy night, during which again and again I thought I heard some stir of movement in the house, to find that Marjorie had already breakfasted and gone out. Presently she came back in a state of high heat and excitement. "I have been clever," she said. "I've found all about the adorable house. A certain Mr. Willoughby is the owner of it, and 2 years ago his wife disappeared and was never traced. He lived on there alone till this spring, when he made up his mind to sell the house and had an auction of all its contents." "Where did you learn all this?" I asked. "From the house agent, whose name and address was on the board there. He lives just down the street, and the name of the house is Beetles. Just Beetles. Did you ever hear of anything so attractive?" "Beetles would smell as sweet," I began. "No, it wouldn't." And then I was cleverer still, and you'll never guess where I went next. It was an inspiration. "Do you want me to have an inspiration too?" I asked, "or say that I've no idea?" "No. Have an inspiration if you can," said Marjorie. "You went to the shop where we bought the witch ball yesterday and found that it came from the sale at Beetles." "Heavens, we're both inspired," said Marjorie. "Quite right. But how did you think of that?" "Well, you mentioned an auction." "Very brilliant," she said. "And now, as I know you hate talking at breakfast, I shall go away and look at my witch ball. Isn't it odd that I said I should be so happy living at Beetles with it, and that now I find that it came from there?" Though I was late this morning, you was later, and it was not for some minutes after Marjorie had gone that he appeared. He helped himself to food and propped up a daily paper in front of his place, but after staring at it in silence, whisked it away again. "There are odd things happening," he said. "Something or somebody came out of the witch ball last night, at least that's how I felt it, and stood at the open door of the book room. I saw nothing any more than you did, but it was there, and it's been here ever since. It was moving about the house all last night, and it wants something of us." "I felt it was here too," I said. "Well, we've got to give it a chance," he said. "We must sit again, and now that it has established some sort of communication, it will probably manifest itself more clearly. I believe that the figure we first saw lying underneath the tree is what is wanting us. So we must sit again, and there is no use in waiting till the evening. Let's have a gaze at the ball this morning, when Marjorie's occupied elsewhere. I fancy there's something horrible behind it all, and I don't want her to know about it." That was easily arranged, for Marjorie soon announced her intention of sketching in one of the old streets of the town, and as soon as she had gone, we went into the book room again. There on a table near the door into the garden stood the witch ball, a huge blazing sapphire, and once more we prepared to gaze. There were disturbing cross-lights, and we drew the curtains over all the windows, so that the only illumination came from the open garden door. But though it was daylight now, we had hardly begun to concentrate when the color faded from the ball, and presently I was gazing into thick, clear darkness, depth upon depth, in which, as last night, there seethed the luminous bubbles, and there emerged again the house we had seen, and the kitchen garden, and the row of willows. But now there was no figure of a woman lying there beneath them, and I wondered where she had gone. I told Hugh what I was seeing, and he nodded without speaking. And then, with some cold shuddering and sinking of the spirit, I knew that there was someone else here besides us, and a dimming of the light which came in from the garden door made me look up. Just outside, in the hot, bright sunshine, there stood the figure of a woman. She was dressed in some sort of cloak, mold-stained and rent and decaying, and snails and fibers of root clung to it. One hand was wrapped in it, holding it to her, but the other, with the arm up to the elbow, was visible. Here and there the bone showed, Here and there, lumps of rotting flesh dangled from it. Above, thick, rusty-colored hair drooped on each side of what had been a face. But now the flesh had fallen away from the mouth, exposing the rows of discolored teeth. The nose was an earth-stained stump of cartilage, and the eye sockets were empty. The decay and horror of it all were vividly illuminated by the sunlight. Something froze within me. I could only look, and then the spectre advanced to the open door as if it was about to step into the room. At that, my panic-stricken nerves broke through their paralysis of terror, and I screamed out. And, behold, there was nothing there but the wash of hot summer sun over the garden and the breeze that stirred in the myrtle bush by the door. Now, the inspector of police at Tillingham is a friend of mine, and 10 minutes later you and I were closeted with him. "Not burglary or anything of that sort, I hope," he said genially as we sat down. "No, nothing of the kind," I said. "But there were just a couple of questions my friend and I wanted to ask you. I fancy that about 2 years ago, Mrs. Willoughby disappeared from her husband's house down in the marsh." "That's correct," he said, "and her husband continued living there till the spring of this year, when he had an auction of his furniture and put the house up for sale." "And has anything ever been heard of Mrs. Willoughby?" I asked. "Never a word nor a trace has been seen of her since she disappeared. Most mysterious thing. Has either of you gentlemen got anything to tell me about her?" "Was search made for her in the neighborhood of the house?" asked Hugh. "Certainly, sir. The dikes were dragged in case she had fallen into one, for there was foggy weather, and if she had lost her memory and gone wandering, she might have slipped in and been drowned. But there wasn't much else to search, for it's a bare bit of land with no woods anywhere near." "We were there yesterday," I said. "There's a kitchen garden adjoining the house, and on one side of it a row of young willows planted evidently not very long ago. My friend and I both believe that if you dig under them at the end which adjoins the tool house, you may learn something about Mrs. Willoughby's disappearance." The inspector stared at us a moment in silence. "Can you give me any reason for your believing that?" he asked. "Nothing that would carry any weight with you," said Hugh. "But we're both fearfully serious about it. You hardly imagine, I suppose, that we're trying a hoax on you." He sat there a moment longer, looking from one to the other of us, and then got up. "I should like to know more," he said, "but if you don't mean to tell me, there it is. I'm bound to look into any information given me. I expect what you gentlemen mean is that a body will be found there, though I can't tell why you think so. Below the willows along the kitchen garden, and at the end by the tool shed. I think you said? I'll let you know at once if anything is discovered." A few hours later I was called to the telephone. The inspector wished to tell me that the body of a woman had been found at the place indicated. A couple of days later an inquest was held and her identity established. For several days, and more than once a day, Hugh and I gazed into the witch ball, but never again did we see that black boiling up of something within it, which presently disclosed the row of willows and what had lain beneath. Nor did any apparition again manifest itself. It had been used, I think we must suppose, by some occult and mysterious agency to perform a certain office, and had now given forth the perilous stuff with which it was charged. It hangs still, a blue and radiant splendor, in Marjorie's sitting-room, and sometimes she almost makes up her mind to give it me, but has never quite scaled those heights of altruism. The sequel of the discovery of the body of Mrs. Willoughby I need not recount, for I am sure it is familiar to all those who take an interest in murder trials. The End of the Witch Ball. Written by E.F. Benson and told to you by Edward E. French. And that's it for this week. This program returns next week on the audio device of your choice, or the choice of your loved one, if you've got that kind of thing going. And I hope that you're back, because I know I will be. The email address for this program is edwardfrench06@hotmail.com. So long from the west coast of the USA.